So hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to this Learning Academy webinar session. During this session today, we'll discuss the evolving business context and why this moment of uncertainty requires specific skills to navigate it effectively. My name is Leonel Lisboa, and I'm head of Löning Academy, the capacity building arm of Learning. And I have the pleasure of being your host today. I am a human rights lawyer and a specialist in human rights education. I have been working in this field for more than a decade now, and I also worked as a government advisor and in-house human rights specialist in mining companies before joining Learning. At Learning, I wear two hats. One as a consultant doing practical work, advising companies and helping them implement human rights and environmental due diligence. And the other hat is this of head of the academy, where we provide trainings for companies and professionals, combining this hands-on experience with our methodological expertise. A quick intro to those who don't know us yet as Learning. So Learning is an international management consultancy specialized in corporate sustainability and human rights. We are based in Berlin. We advise companies in all these aspects of human rights and environmental due diligence. And as I have already said, the Learning Academy is our teaching arm. I'm here today with two of my colleagues, Zara Blanc and Rita Delgado Correcher, who bring together this deep expertise in both academia and corporate ESG strategy. Rita is an academic and consultant specializing in business and human rights and a learning partner in Spain. She teaches business and human rights at Spain's leading business schools and draws on her experience founding and managing a company to ground her training practice in real operational challenges. Zara is a senior consultant here at Learning and is an expert in ESG strategy with over 7 years of experience developing and implementing sustainability programs across very diverse companies. She brings experience that ranges from these operational tasks to moderating board committees. Zara uses this wide experience to support Learning Academy as a trainer. So thank you all for joining today. Before we start, just some final reminders here. So this is a session that is structured in 45 minutes. We begin now with a conversation among the three of us that is going to last about 30 minutes. Then we have a Q&A session of 15 minutes. Please, you can use the Q&A function in the Zoom to put your questions. Don't confuse this with a chat function. Focus on the Q&A function. And you can upvote the existing questions, and this will help us prioritize the questions that are more relevant to you. The recording of this webinar and some other links are going to be shared with you in the after webinar communication. So let me set up the scene for what we're going to discuss today. If you are someone navigating business and human rights and sustainability right now, you're likely seeing just how much uncertainty is in the air, and not just in your organization, like everywhere. So recent developments like the EU Council decision on the Omnibus proposal have shown how political shift can directly impact the direction of sustainability initiatives in Europe and in global supply chains. We've heard commitments from EU leaders in the past about upholding these high social and environmental standards while making things simpler for companies. But what was really happening in practice shows us this tension between short-term cost concerns and long-term value of sustainability. There is an active debate now about this, and also the concern of watering down these key requirements of the EU Green Deal. So this is the big picture. We are in a moment where professionals like you and me are being asked to navigate very mixed signals. In one hand, we have this businesses facing growing demands for clear ESG data, strong due diligence, and real accountability. And in the other hand, there's political and legal landscapes that are in flux. But the most important thing is that the needs of the rights holders and of the environment are present, they are pressing, they are urgent. So to make sense of it all and to navigate these uncertainties, we need to consider the context and the path that we followed to find us where we are. So Zara, you worked in corporate ESG strategy in both inside major retailers and also as a consultant advising different businesses. From your perspective, how have you seen the sustainability mandate evolve inside companies in the recent years?
Well, it's been a couple of days. I now have been in the field, so let me reminisce. When I started working in corporate sustainability, regulatory requirements were barely on the agenda. So while listed companies already, of course, had to publish sustainability reports, laws like the German Supply Chain Act weren't really part of the conversation yet. So they were on the horizon, but yeah, it was not even clear if it's coming. So at that time, the main pressure came from the outside of the companies. So civil society, media, NGOs, they really were highlighting the reputational risk for companies, and also investors and the financial sector having a first look, or sometimes also a more closer look at the ESG performance of companies already, but still the most sustainability efforts were voluntary and often seen as secondary. So that quite changed when it became clear that in the German market, the obviously German Supply Chain Act was coming. So suddenly companies faced legal obligations and not just only reputational risks. And what I sensed, or what I also heard from a lot of sustainability experts back then, is that created a real shift in dynamics also internally. And internally, I personally, in my in-house roles, saw leadership teams paying much more attention to the topic, and the tone also changed. So sustainability became a compliance issue, and obviously with that came urgency and internal accountability as well. And this transition from voluntary action to legal obligation triggered a broader change process in companies. And we also see the same dynamic in other areas driven by other EU regulations. But at the moment, what we're seeing is that the momentum of this change moment is slowing down, because you mentioned it already, Leonel, of the ongoing political discussions, especially on the EU level, namely Omnibus. And companies are caught between the need to realign and an unwillingness or inability, maybe also insecurity, to handle the additional complexity in this already turbulent times. And of course, I mean, there is political uncertainty, there are resource constraints, and we are at a risk that the transformative energy we just saw a few years ago may lose traction. So my personal approach, or my personal opinion on that, is overall we moved from the nice to have to must have. And now it's key not to only see it from a legal point of view, but especially also from a strategic point of view, to not endanger like that the transition is already over, because from our perspective at Löning, the transition is far from over.
Yeah, Zara, very interesting, very interesting. And how do you see this transition looking in practice? And how do we keep people aligned around it?
Yeah. I mean, you cannot really change my mind on that one, because I have really strong emotions on this, but really, I think first things first, we need a better narrative for sustainability. So sustainability cannot be an abstract concept any longer, and it really has to connect to the business value, to the core business value, in a language that people in finance, operations, the boardroom, you name it, understand. So that it can ultimately be seen as what it is, a strategic advantage, and not just altruism or cost driver. So practically, this means that sustainability teams must act as translators and connectors across the business. And it's really not just the sustainability department's job. I mean, it was never, and most people in the audience probably also know this, but this is how it was handled a long time. So it's really about embedding ownership across the business. And I mean, that's by heart is change management. So it is really important to acknowledge that we're in a certain phase where we're trying really to turn things around and to also think core business processes in a different way. And I think one major thing we always keep forgetting is that there is no playbook, so to say. I mean, the regulations, they do offer a good guideline, and especially the CSRD with all the data points you have to report on. But a lot of this is about trying new things, learning quickly, and not being afraid to admit when something doesn't work. And companies really need to cultivate an environment in which this is also possible. So sustainability is, I would say, fairly new to the game. And it's even newer to a lot of companies that are now tackled or now under the EU regulations. So there is still a lot to learn. And I think companies and especially the management needs to consider this.
Yeah, exactly. And we as sustainability professionals, we are like expected to translate these frameworks into action, build cross-functional alignments, and keep initiatives moving even in this moments of shifts in context. And this is very demanding, right? It involves being able to drive change in super dynamics and sometimes very conflicting environments. And this brings me then to a question for Rita. So, from your perspective, Rita, as someone that is working both in corporate advisory and in education, are we doing enough to equip professionals to succeed in this reality?
Well, honestly, the answer is not always. We're not always preparing people well enough to manage this complexity. I can share that there's definitely a lot of interest in the field right now. I have access to studios, for instance, that show that even in these uncertain times, the number of registration for courses of human rights and sustainability in business schools is growing. And also professionals from other sectors want to make a shift. So it's a priority of area for many. But from my experience, both in consulting and teaching, there's often still a gap in between that interest and what the work actually looks in practice. For example, my first approach to business and human rights was an online course, which was insightful, but honestly, extremely theoretical. It gave me big concepts, but it didn't really explain what it means for a company to do human rights due diligence on a Monday morning, how to work with suppliers, manage internal pushbacks, or align with legal requirements that are constantly evolving. That only became clear to me through my work at Löning, where I saw firsthand the practical challenges companies actually have to face. This is something I see in my students too. Even in academia, there can be a little bit of detachment from reality. We tend to focus on the frameworks and the theory, which are of course important, but often human rights itself can become polarized or even contested. So it might not mean the same if you're talking to business, if you're talking to an NGO, governmental officials, or students or academics. So I think here we have a strong need in the market for a common ground, a shared language that moves beyond theory and politics and focuses on real implementation. Companies need people who understand what due diligence actually looks like in practice and who can see it's not the same to do this in mining than in agri-food or in communications, for example. So I say we need education that is much more grounded in learning by doing, in experiential practice, and really understanding sector-specific challenges. Because that's what companies are looking for, people who can help them navigate uncertainty with practical, tailored solution, not just abstract ideals. As Sarah was just pointing, it's about taking this concept, which is abstract, and like grounding it and making it more real. The good news is that the shift is happening. More people are coming into the field motivated by purpose, and there's growing recognition that we need to bridge this gap between interest and practice. And that's very encouraging because it means we're building capacity for change in a more real, grounded way.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree, Rita. The need to equip is now for us, for all of us, not only with knowledge, but with the ability to act, right? And that's what I want to explore now. And that's probably where people in the audience are thinking, and also I see some of the questions popping up on that. So what does it actually take to succeed in this moment now? And I want to get back to you, Zara, on this. I want to hear from you. What are the challenges you see inside companies now, and how can we navigate it?
I mean, in general, we do see several challenges at companies. And when it comes to sustainability, I've seen them both in my previous in-house roles and now in my work also with clients across industries. And maybe one thing as a little intervention before I really dig into the topics is that I think what's really important here to mention is that we're all sitting in the same boat, and we're all facing the same challenges. This is something I very often experience with clients, and this is also why I really want to address this to the audience, is when we're entering for a project, for a training, whatsoever, sometimes it feels a little bit like they are apologizing for all the political discussion going on, and also maybe the backlash they are getting from different departments. But really, the challenges are exactly the same. So really, we're sitting in the same boat. And I mean, one of the biggest issues I think we can all conclude is the lack of consistent tone from the top, especially under the current political uncertainty. I mean, with the current political uncertainty, especially around evolving regulations like the CSDDD, many executive teams are a little hesitant to make strong commitments or even commitments. And the concern obviously is that they might invest time and resources into implementing frameworks and systems and so on, and that those things can then change again in 6 months or 3 months, since there's a lack of trust to whatever will be in the regulations then. So, I mean, this is quite understandable, but as a result, sustainability managers are finding it increasingly difficult to secure the buy-in from leadership and also to get the resources they need for whatever they're doing or whatever they are up to. So that puts a lot of pressure on those driving the agenda, the sustainability agenda internally. And also, in conclusion, the missing leadership signal has very real consequences, because when the tone from the top is weak or unclear, it becomes extremely hard to move things forward operationally. And yeah, I mean, teams become less engaged, initiatives stall, and even existing efforts can then start to lose momentum, which is quite sad to, yeah, see your work being watered down. So in the absence of this strong executive support, it is super difficult to prioritize sustainability amid other competing business pressures, especially in the times of economic uncertainty or restructuring. And I mean, I think that's also another quite common challenge we all have faced in our jobs, is the quite siloed nature of many organizations. So sustainability is inherently cross-cutting. It touches procurement, HR, compliance, legal, finance, you name it, operations, whatsoever. So, but in many companies, these departments still operate largely in isolation. And as a result, of course, it is very difficult to convey the full picture of what sustainability means for the business as a whole. And each team only sees their own piece of puzzle. And yeah, what it actually does is it limits both strategic alignment and operational effectiveness. So yeah, and maybe to make it even more complex, sustainability professionals are very often expected to wear multiple hats, just like you, Leonel, at once. And they have to be, for example, strategists and thinking long-term, aligning with corporate goals. But at the same time, they are required to be expected to be the technical experts, really to understanding regulatory detail, climate data, human rights, and so on. And on top of that, they are most of the times also communicators, so constantly translating complex issues for different internal stakeholders, from really engineers to board members. And I mean, that's a lot of roles to play, and those roles often come with very limited resources or support.
Yeah. Yeah, that this combination of like high expectations, limited resources, and the constant need to translate across departments is quite a high demand, right? And as I see some of the questions that are coming up on the Q&A, also regarding on how do we develop the skills for that. And that's why it's good to have you with us, Rita. From your experience, what are the core skills that people need to succeed, both if they are entering the field or if they are growing into more strategic roles?
Yeah, let's actually split it into these two parts exactly. So on the one hand, 3 essential entry-level skills, and then the more advanced skills for people who are already in the field. So basic entry-level skills should be analytical and research, curiosity and creativity, and problem solving. Analytical and research skills. What do I mean? This is fundamental, of course, at entry level, and also referring to the question in the chat. Maybe you need to get familiar, of course, with the basic legal frameworks like the UNGPs, the OECD guidelines, but of course also national legislations and European frameworks. And this is very important, but it's not just this theory. I think this ability to research has to go a little bit further. For instance, we're now dealing with a project in which we have to identify risks in the pharma sector, and we need to understand for this how an antibiotic is produced through fermentation. So I think in this line of work, you really have to have these skills of really analyzing and applying the theoretical framework to the sector-specific, company-specific project. Then also I said curiosity, and in this sense, also again referring to the question in the chat, it's not about having all the answers, it's about asking good questions. So even in your work, I think you have to question yourself all the time and asking yourself, why is this risk here? How can I do this better in the supply chain? Who needs to be involved? And I think also curiosity, something that can be done is joining these kinds of forums like webinars or sessions, also to keep being informed. And lastly, creativity and problem solving. Yeah, I think consulting is not a tick box, like guidance is usually general, and sometimes you don't have perfect data. So you need to walk around this and try to find workable solution, whether it is building a supplier questionnaire that makes sense or a training session that connects to colleagues. I think it's always about assessing the one-by-one scenario and adapting everything you know and you gather to that specific situation. And then for the second part, the people who are already working in this field, including us, things that you can do for upskilling and growing capabilities would be, sector-specific application, strategic alignment and decision-making, and last, communication and change management. So sector-specific, I already mentioned this before. You have the broad framework, but then it's very different to adapt it to mining, then to agri-food, then to communication. So I think it's very interesting to have expertise in a sector that's interesting for you. Then also strategic alignment and decision making. It's not only about analyzing risks, you're actually helping a company to shape their strategy. So you need to learn how to prioritize these risks, align with evolving legal requirements, manage trade-offs, and advise decision makers. So it's moving really from identifying the issues to making clear, practical recommendations. And I put a lot of emphasis on this practical. At the end of the day, the idea is that you design measures that all departments can understand and that are easily implemented. And then also, I think communication is very essential for change management. You need to be able to bring the people around you because you need, on the one hand, to be able to translate maybe complex challenges in a language that everybody's going to understand, but also to be able to communicate to procurement, legal, board, and even external stakeholders and make them understand the why we're doing this and why it's good for the company and for all. So yeah, this means, of course, having to train your colleagues, but also sometimes managing internal resistance and at the end, embedding these practices in the organization. And this is why upskilling is so critical because, complexity and uncertainty are not going away. And companies need people who can not only understand these challenges, but also navigate them, translate them, and lead change in a very, very practical, grounded way.
Yeah, Rita, you and Zara have painted this quite comprehensive picture. As we see, there is a clear need in the field for practical skills, shared language, and the ability to navigate the uncertainty strategically. As Löning Academy, we have been supporting professionals and companies with tailoring trainings and that are designed for their specific needs. And up to now, we have focused on compliance-based approach and risk-based approach. So we have trainings that are based on specific legislations like the LKSG, the EU battery regulation, the EU deforestation regulation, the OECD due diligence framework. And we also have these ones that are more risk-based, like supply chain management and risk and crisis management trainings. But as we discussed here, we have identified the interest for clients and for other sustainability professionals for situational based upskilling trainings. And we have a great announcement that I'm very excited and I'm going to talk about it after the Q&A session. So let's first look at the questions here. There is one interesting question that I would like to hear from you, especially Zara, if you can take it first. What for you is the motivation for the clients at Löning to implement sustainability strategies? Is it more like regulatory push, like workers' interest, strategic interest? How do you see this in the current moment?
I mean, what I just said, like my very strong opinion about we need a new narrative around sustainability is a very good entry point to answer this question. Because to be honest, it is at the moment a mix of everything. So from a company perspective, it is mainly driven from the regulatory part, which is on a pause, so to say. So also within the company, it is on a pause. But what we see most likely with our partners at the company, which are mainly sustainability managers, is that they're very intrinsic. There's a very intrinsic motivation for them to push this also forward. And also on a personal level, many employees of companies do find this very interesting. But going one step back, I mean, and that's where the narrative thing comes into play, is why we have to think about why the Green Deal was actually created. And this is to keep businesses in business also for a long time. So, I mean, we're facing certain challenges. And with sustainability, very often it comes like the altruistic narrative, like, oh, we're doing something good for the planet. But from our perspective at Löning, we always tell our clients, hey, listen, this is also business critical because resources, for example, they will be shortened in quite a while. So how do you want to run your business if you cannot extract endless resources, for example? So that's where circularity comes into place. Also from a risk management perspective, that's where very much human rights are linked to. So it's better to understand your supply chain and to understand where maybe armed conflicts are happening and how this can affect your corporation than not to deal with those kind of topics. So really, I mean, it's a combination of everything at the moment, but really I advocate strongly to go more into the directive to change the narrative and make it business critical more. It is business critical, but really to advocate also that it is business critical to keep up with sustainability.
Yeah, Zara. Yes. Yeah, as we discussed, right, there is a combination of factors, and just as people, companies react to different incentives, right? There are different things that make companies tick and people tick. And I really like your take on this aspect of like business critical. And this might be a very good connection for a question to Rita. So one of the questions here in the Q&A is on so there is a clear prioritization of sustainability efforts that I read here. I think that is like sustainability as more focused on environment efforts and the sidelining of social impact and human development and governance aspect. Do you agree with this assumption, Rita? And what are your thoughts on this? How do you see the moment and the trends?
Yeah, I agree that probably up until now there was a big trend in which the E was shining brighter than the S and the G. And especially, I mean, I've been now working as Löning's office in Spain for a couple of years, and especially at the beginning, it was something that even in senior management programs that I participated in for people working as sustainability in businesses, the S was a little bit unknown, but I think this is growing. And interest is really growing. And I think also a little bit relating to the question before, I was lately having a conversation with someone working for a tech company about this whole impact of regulatory uncertainty in the practices. And she said very clearly that they had been working in this sustainability, social, human rights department before regulations. And no matter what regulations bring, they'll still do it because they have understood that this is very critical for the company, and that if they understand what's their risk, this makes them more resilient, and they can really be a stronger company. So I think this is also the narrative that we're trying to figure out, that I also heard we're like shifting in the big cycles of sustainability, and we're moving from a cycle that it's like a lot of regulation to one which regulation is maybe weakening, but we're now having businesses that are really understanding that sustainability as ESG, the three perspectives, is actually like a factor that is a competitive factor. And for instance, we have now a program in Spain trying to teach this to narrative and welcome them on board with suppliers in the agri-food sector. So yeah, I think the time of the S and the governance is starting.
Thank you. So what you were saying now about like the competitive edge and how this is important for companies, and what Zara mentioned of making this like business critical in the narrative. So there are two questions in the Q&A here that I think can be combined. So maybe you take it first, Zara, and Rita, if you want to also contribute on this. So the questions are: how do you keep momentum internally with regulations that are delayed or weakened? And the other question was on how to put a price tag on human rights risk. So I think that they kind of answer one to the other, and it connects well with what we're discussing here. But maybe it would be really good to hear your thoughts, Zara, on this element of like, how do we put a price tag on human rights risk, and how do we keep things moving when legislations are in flux?
I mean, I'm gonna answer the first one with the momentum first. So basically, it pretty much aligns with what I've just said. So it's business critical, and so are the key elements of the regulations. And overall, if you're having a look at what they're currently discussing and so on, so you can always find a way to make economic entry points for your management, for your C-level, whatsoever, to understand why you should follow up with this, even though you might not be in scope anymore. But then you can also make a business case, for example, that you have clients or investors, or like the financial world is giving you like a better offer for your what is the word, investments. So you can always find a way to use different aspects to really push forward the whole process to implement what those regulations are actually asking for. And especially when it comes to regulations that are based on due diligence elements, those elements won't change. For example, CSDDD, they are based on the UNGP, and it's very much unlikely that everything will change. So you can already start to prepare, and you can underline it with economic arguments. So yeah, so at least that's what I advise my clients to do. And that's also what I did when I still was working in-house. And I mean, with the price tag question, I think that's a little bit a tricky one, because first of all, I think the approach really needs to match what you're doing at your company and how high also your level of ambition in terms of sustainability is. But let me give you a very simple explanation. I mean, Leonel, this one is familiar to you. I think it's quite nice or quite easy to understand when you're a mining company, for example, and you're having a strike in one of your mines, how much money you lose for lawyers, how much money you use for one production day, and so on. So you can easily put a price tag on that. And of course, there are human rights where it's much harder, and there also are models out there who can actually put a price tag on human rights, like child labor or forced labor as well. And I mean, we see those concepts also in different sectors. For example, when it comes to insurances, they put a price tag on human life, so to say. So, I mean, there are also models out there who can help you to do that, to monetize human rights, so to say. I think this is something where you have to be careful and really understand what's happening there in order to not to get any scrutiny from NGOs, from society and so on. But just as an information, there are models out there who are already doing this, and maybe also Rita wants to add to this.
Yeah, very briefly, because you already mentioned it, I think good point is that irrespective of the different national regulations or European regulation, like the basis is the UNGPs and the OCDE framework. So actually, if a company wants to build a framework, if they do it in alignment with the OCDE and the UNGPs, I think you can like build a framework that is going to be aligned with whatever comes. Probably it will need some adjustments, but you can have a robust due diligence framework. And at the end of the day, it's also about opening markets and about being able to reach to places and be more competitive. This is something we work a lot in Spain, but it's also interesting how, for instance, in Europe, we're now having this debate, and simultaneously we're now speaking with some colleagues in Ecuador, because I don't know if people know, but the Ecuador just passed a judicial decision that actually it's compelling the government. So in the coming years, they actually need to implement mandatory human rights due diligence regulations. So I think, maybe here we're having the discussion, but in other places, regulations are being implemented. Even when there's omnibus, there's other regulations at a European level that are going to be implemented in the coming years. And I think also we can agree that even if there is a little bit of pushback, sustainability and ESG are here to stay. And it's not really it's not an if it's going to happen. There might be differences in the scope and the timing, but I think wise companies should prepare, and there is absolutely information on how to do it in alignment with the UNGPs and the OCDE guidelines.
Completely, yeah. And this thing mentioning on how to deal with the price tag on human rights, right? This is very interesting because in one hand, of course, human rights are non-negotiable, right? We have to respect human rights, and we support companies on respecting human rights. On the other hand, companies are what negotiates things, right? So companies are made to negotiate, buy, sell, rent stuff. So of course, companies to strive in companies, we need to be able to translate these kind of untranslatable things and demonstrate internally for business management what would be the internal consequences as well as the external consequences of these human rights risks when they manifest, right? And to calculate, as Zara mentioned, like, so what are the impacts of one day of a mine that is not working, that is not functioning, or that you cannot move out the production on that day. So very interesting discussions and very interesting questions. We have time maybe for one final question, if we focus on this final question. And I would like to ask you both, Zara and Rita, for one skill among all the skills that we have mentioned and the challenges. If you would have to name one skill, it doesn't have to be the most important, but one skill that comes to your mind as important now for sustainability professionals like us to develop further. Zara?
Well, I think I have to go with storytelling, because that is something very essential I had to learn when I moved from my operational role to a more strategic role within a company. Because if you tell a story very well and you can underline it with certain KPIs and so on, it's much easier to get to a point where you get what you need. Yeah, so I think that's a very essential, especially if you're in a leadership position or a team lead, head of whatsoever, that's also dealing with a lot of strategic stuff. Paint the picture and paint it good. So that's my advice.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah, I think from the ones that actually were mentioned before, I'm going back to one of the basics, but I think creativity and problem solving for sure. I think in these uncertain times, it's also important to see maybe if things are shifting, where we can still find this common ground of, like you just said before, like human rights are non-negotiable, of things that we can still do and how to prepare work that can resist any changes in legislations and is like really grounded in the basics, but at the same time, very, as we mentioned before, sector specific. So yeah, I think I'll go with that.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we have some questions that we were not able to answer here due to the time, but we're going to address them in the after webinar communication. As I mentioned, and this thing that I'm very excited to announce, so we created a new training. It's called Sustainability Leadership Training, Navigating Uncertainty with Strategy, Storytelling, and Influence. So it is a small group, expert-led course designed to equip professionals with the tools to lead and to influence effectively, even when in the scenarios that we mentioned, like when laws, expectations, and internal priorities are changing, they are in flux all the time. So the training focuses on 4 core areas. So on strategic thinking under uncertainty, sustainability storytelling for the internal buy-in, influencing across functions even without the formal authority, and applied change leadership in contexts that are complex or that we have delayed regulatory definitions. It will be a very interactive 3-hour session with a maximum of 15 participants. And as a part of the training, participants will get a workbook and a case toolkit, and of course, a Löning Academy certificate. The first session that we're going to hold on this training is going to be on September 19, which is a Friday, 9:30 in the morning to 12:30 Central European Time. It's going to be held in English and online. You, as participants of this webinar, get an early bird discount. You can register using the QR code that you can see on the other slide. We also are going to share with you here in the chat function the link so that there you are, the QR code, and the link that you can use to click and to register. And we're also going to share more information in the after webinar communication. So please share this training with your friends and colleagues that also might be interested. So wrapping up in the interest of time, what we learned today is that uncertainty, fortunately or unfortunately, is not gonna go away. So that doesn't mean that we have to stand still. It means that we need new skills, we need to adapt and combine our technical expertise with the ability to influence, to translate, and to lead across sectors. Because producing real impact means not only knowing what is right, but making it work in any context with the tools that we have at hand. This is the core message that we have today. Thank you for joining us. You'll find, as I mentioned, the link of the recording, the link for the training in the after webinar communication. Hope to see you in the upcoming training. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.